This chapter is talking about the regathering of the Jews back into the land of Israel. Just look at verse 24. I will take you from among the heathen, the nations, and gather you out of all countries, and will bring you into your own land. And that ties in, doesn't it, with the words of the Lord Jesus about the fact that the Jews would regain their land. Now, I'm not standing here with any political agenda at all. That's just a stonewall fact. That prophecy has come true. The Jews are back in their land. Jesus said they'd regain control of Jerusalem. They have. But look now at this, though. At the beginning of this chapter 36 in Ezekiel, the prophet prophesies directly to the mountains of Israel. Just make sure you've noted that there in verse 1. Prophesying to the mountains of Israel. And say, ye mountains of Israel. And again, you can see it there again in verse 8. But ye, O mountains of Israel. So where are the mountains of Israel? Well, I've shared the screen. You can see, hopefully, the map that I've put there. And the dotted line is going around, isn't it? The mountains of Israel. Now, that is showing the West Bank area. And I'll show you another map to just make sure that that's absolutely clear to you. So in prophesying to the mountains of Israel, it's like a prophecy to the West Bank area. It's a hot topic in the world news because before 1967, it was under Jordanian control. But after the Six-Day War in 1967, Israel, against all the odds, took control of that land. Now, look at what this prophecy says. Let's read this together now. Ezekiel 36, verse 8. Ye, O mountains of Israel, ye shall shoot forth your branches and yield your fruit to my people of Israel, for they are at hand to come. For behold, I am for you, and I will turn unto you, and ye shall be tilled and sown. And I will multiply men upon you, all the house of Israel, even all of it, and the cities shall be inhabited, and the waste places, or the wastes shall be builded. And I will multiply upon you man and beast, and they shall increase and bring fruit. And I will settle you after your old estates, and will do better unto you than at your beginnings. And ye shall know that I am the Lord, I am Yahweh. So, there the prophet has made a prophecy directly to that area, to the mountains of Israel, to the West Bank area. And it's simply remarkable, isn't it? There, I've put again on the screen, highlighted some of the things that just jump out at us. God says he's going to increase the number of people living there. He's going to settle them on that. And again, I will cause my people Israel to live on you, just in case we're not sure which people it is. And men are multiplying on these mountains. There is a headline. Israeli authorities approved 2,000 new settlement units in Jerusalem on the West Bank. So these settlements were put in place. Another headline. A watchdog says Israel's West Bank settlement surged in 2019. And I'll be honest, when you sort of look at this, the numbers are difficult because one side is sort of trying to sort of put out low numbers and the other side is trying to say that it's huge numbers. But either way, what is absolutely clear is that men are multiplying on the West Bank. Surely this is the hand of God at work. There God says, on those mountains, I'm going to multiply upon you, man and beast. I'm going to put settlements there. I'm going to settle you there. And what we see is just that on that very place, the mountains of Israel. And what Israel has done since it came a state in 1948 is to turn what was once an arid wasteland into astonishing agricultural land. Turn over to Ezekiel 38 now. A couple of chapters on, Ezekiel 38. And verse 8 speaks there of the fact that the Jews would be brought back into their land in the latter years. We see that in verse 8. After many days you'll be visited. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword. Now we're going to look at that verse a bit more in a bit more detail, but this is talking about the fact that an invader is going to come from the north. But we'll come on to that. First of all, the land that's brought back from the sword. The Jews have returned from being in trouble all over the world. They gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel that were always waste, but it is brought forth out of nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. So those nations, those mountains that where they came onto, when they came back to Israel, it was an arid wasteland. And it's remarkable, and it is an incredible thing that's internationally renowned, how the Jews have turned what was an arid wasteland into this amazing agricultural land. African nations are trying to learn from Israel. How have they done it? Nations are queuing to get the Israeli irrigation technology. It's so amazing the way in which they turned this arid wasteland into a land that, as it said there in Ezekiel 36, I'm going to make sure that this land is a land that is going to bring forth fruit for you. Isn't that amazing to see? We see that's happened within the lifetime of people who are listening today. Certainly for me, I've seen in my lifetime these people multiplying upon the mountains of Israel. Let's focus now a bit more on the geopolitical situation of the Middle East and how it's lining up in a way in which Bible students have expected for many years. This chapter that we're now in, chapter 38 of Ezekiel, is a hugely significant chapter about an event which is yet to happen. It's about an invader, as I mentioned earlier, that's going to come down from the north of Israel, come down into the land of Israel, and we know that that invader is referred to here in verse 1 and 2 of Ezekiel 38 as Gog, of the land of Magog. So who can this be talking about? Well, for a long time, Bible students have identified Gog with Russia. John Thomas wrote that over 150 years ago, there in 1861. Gog, the autocrat of the Russians. There, the Youngest Bible Dictionary, which was published in the 50s, states Russia is Gog. There are a variety of clues which point to it being Russia, but to stop that sort of taking over this talk, let's look at the most simple one of them all. When the prophet addresses Gog, he says in verse 15 of Ezekiel 38, Gog, you are going to come from your place out of the north parts, or out of the uttermost parts of the north. This map that I put up for you now, showing us, isn't it, the latitudinal and longitudinal lines through the world. And if we look a bit more closely, we can see that Moscow, often sort of associated with Meshech, there from Ezekiel 38 and verse 2, Gog with the land of Magog, Meshech and Tubal, is directly north of the land of Israel. So if you were going to look at Ezekiel 38, and you're looking at a place that's saying this is going to come somewhere from the uttermost parts of the north, we go to the uttermost parts of the north, there we are in Russia, directly above Jerusalem. But Russia isn't alone in this invasion of the land. So Ezekiel 38 is talking about the fact that Gog, we're saying Russia, is going to come down into the land. They're going to come and attack. We can see that in Ezekiel 38, though, in verse 5, that there are others who are also with Russia. The first one, verse 5, is Persia. Now, Persia, I'm sure you'll realize, changed its name to Iran in 1935. So the key ally to Russia we'd expect to be Iran. Spend 10 minutes researching this, and you'll come across an abundance of evidence that shows that Russia and Iran are working together. At the end of last year, there were sort of articles showing the fact that Russia, with China as well, were doing joint naval exercises. There on that article, it says unprecedented. You know, this is not a normal thing. It's amazing, though, to see these countries coming together and working. The first confederate with Russia. there in verse 5 is Persia. Commentators can see how that Russia and Iran are coming together. In fact, it's interesting, that article in March, looking at what happened with Soleimani's death in January, still saying that actually him out the way is almost bringing Russia and Iran even closer together. Now, next on the list there in verse 5, so we've looked then, there's Russia, Gog, along with Iran, Persia, is Ethiopia we see. Now, actually in the Hebrew, the word Ethiopia we know is the word Cush. It more likely speaks of land below Ethiopia. But if we look at Sudan, for example, we can again, and honestly, this will take you 10 minutes to do a bit of research on this. You'll realize that actually Russia is building relations with these places. Here, let's just read this. Sudan is of major geostrategic importance for Russia, among many other actors. For a long time, both countries have had economic, political, and military relations, leading to Sudan being considered by the Kremlin as a level 5 cooperator, the highest possible. This relation is enforced by Sudan's constant claims of aggressive acts by the United States, which it demands Russia's military assistance. Do you see? They're working together. The next one on the list, look there in verse 5, is Libya. Okay, so once again, just with 5 minutes research, you'll realize that Russia has a strategy with Libya in getting in there and getting them on board with them as well. You can imagine for the leaders of these nations, many of them would far rather go to Russia than to America. It was the Russians that stuck by Bashar al-Assad in Syria. That they'd sooner share Russian values than the morality of America. Another article pointed out the fact that Russia is encircling Europe. Now in verse 6, we then see further nations named. Gomer, and all these bands, the house of Togarmah, are the north quarters too. And thought that could well be relating to Gomer to the territory where France is, Togarmah to the territory around Turkey. But certainly we see there's a confederacy of nations that are going to come against Israel in the last days. It's likely that those European nations then are going to keep building relationships with Russia in the coming weeks and months. Look out for that as a sign. Certainly in 2019, we saw France increasingly coming closer to Russia. And already in 2020, we can see that that has continued. But have a look now at Ezekiel 38. And I want you to again look to verse 7 and see how that the inspired prophet talks about Gog being a guard to some of those nations. Verse 7, be thou prepared, prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them. Now look at what this commentator wrote in October last year, after America started withdrawing from Syria. He writes of it being a changing of the guard. Russia is now the main force. The Daily Telegraph had this headline in October: Russia assumes mantle of supreme power broker in Middle East as the US retreats from Syria. We also notice from this chapter, Ezekiel 38, that Gog comes down into the land of Israel for a spoil. We see that in verse 12. You're going to come down to take a spoil and to take a prey, to turn thine hand unto the desolate places that are now inhabited, and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations, that have gotten cattle and goods, that dwell in the midst of the land. So Gog, there's a reason they're coming down for something, for a spoil, as it says there. We think to ourselves, well, what could that spoil be? And the honest answer, we're not 100% sure on what it is. But there are a couple of good reasons that we can think of as to why it is that Russia would want to come down into the land of Israel. Firstly, one of Russia's key reasons for annexing the Crimea was that it had a huge Russian-speaking population. Now, this is speculation, of course, but it's remarkable to see that of the 9 million Jews that are living in Israel, 1.5 million speak Russian. This is a picture there of Sergei Lavrov. He's the foreign minister for Russia. And regarding Ukraine, he spoke of the need for Russia to defend the rights of Russian-speaking Jews. It turns out that defending their rights can involve annexing land from another country. Now, in speaking of this invasion from the king of the north down into the land of Israel, Zechariah 14 talks of the Jews being taken into captivity. Perhaps Russia would look to take some of its Russian-speaking citizens away, or possibly annex half of Jerusalem. We don't know, but certainly we can see there is a major interest in Israel for Russia because of the huge population of Russian speakers. Another key reason that we can see Russia wanting to come down into the land of Israel to take a spoil would be around energy supplies. In December 2019, Israel opened the Leviathan natural gas field for business. The operating consortium at the time called it a historic turning point in the history of the Israeli economy. This was a headline in January. Greece, Cyprus, Israel signed East Mediterranean gas pipeline deal to ease reliance on Russia. Well, if Europe starts looking away from Russia for its energy supplies, how do you think Russia's going to react? At this time, we also see something else which is remarkable in all this, because Israel and Russia seem to be the best of friends at the moment. In September, Putin spoke of their relationship reaching its highest ever level. This little table that I'm going to put up here shows to you that Netanyahu has come closer to Russia in the last 5 years. It's so ironic, isn't it? Russia's in cahoots with Israel's sworn enemies, with Iran, with Syria. It's working with Iran in the territory directly to the north of Israel, in Syria, and yet Russia is openly talking about being friends with Israel. That's fascinating, because look what verse 11 says of Ezekiel 38. Russia is going to think to themselves, I'm going to go to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. So Russia is going to invade when Israel are relaxed. They somehow feel safe. And so therefore we can imagine that Israel may well be lured into a sense of safety with the Russian presence being there. It's another interesting factor to watch. A final point regarding the king of the north is that in Daniel 11, speaking of this same event of Russia coming down, the king of the north coming down into the land of Israel, the prophet refers to the king of the north coming with ships. Now, it's only in the last few years that we've seen how easy that will be now for Russia. You remember first Sevastopol in Crimea became their deep sea port for the Mediterranean. And then in 2019, President Assad, the president of Syria, gave them a lease of the port in Tarsus. So I've marked that on the map there, gave them this lease for 49 years as a thank you for helping him to keep power in Syria. And it's been noted that even during this whole pandemic of the coronavirus, Russia keeps on moving its forces down to Tartus, down to this area. The ships are there ready. Daniel 11, speaking about this same event of the king of the north coming down into the land of Israel to attack, talks about it coming with ships. For years, people thought, how would that be with Russia? In the last 2 years, we've seen it happening. The ships are moving down. They now have a port directly to the north of Israel. Now, it's not that every nation is confederate with Russia. We're told in verse 13 that some nations challenge Russia Sheba and Dedan, and all the merchants of Tarshish, with all the young lions thereof, shall say unto thee to go to Russia, art you come to take a spoil? Have you gathered thy company to take a prey, to carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, to take away a great spoil? So you can see these nations are challenging go to Russia as it's coming down. They're not all on its side. They're not all, as the beginning of the chapter is showing those who are confederate with it. Here in verse 13, those who are opposed to it, saying, well, what are you doing this? So who are they then? Sheba, Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish, and the young lions thereof. Well, in terms of Sheba and Dedan, we know that they occupied in ancient times the place that we now know as Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. And we know that makes that just particularly interesting is that Saudi Arabia is completely against Iran. Saudi Arabia would much rather work with Israel, relationship with them, than go along with anything that Iran has to say. So how interesting to see Russia and Iran lining up on one side, and here, Saudi Arabia so far on the other side. But what about Tarshish? Well, Tarshish we believe to be Britain. And there on your screen, I've put the key clues taken from facts that we know about Tarshish from the Bible. So this is why it is that people believe that Tarshish is Britain. And I think it's a really, really strong case. Interestingly, just on a walk from our house 2 days ago, went along by a little beach called Pulfdi Beach. And there it's got a sign saying on it that historically, only a little while ago, they were trading in tin and in lead. Yeah, that's what they were trading on just from a beach near our house. So, and they were using that to trade to other nations. So amazing to think that those clues are there to help us to see that Britain must have been Tarshish. Be assured, though, that's not simply a conclusion that's been jumped on today, because I happened to go on that walk 2 days ago. It's hugely significant, though. In fact, it brings us right up to date with the things that happened with Brexit. Why? You see, Bible students believed, as we said, Tarshish to be Britain, and they knew that Britain could not be on the side of Gog and Gomer and those nations, the European nations there. They knew that Tarshish was standing against them, saying, well, what are you doing? They couldn't have been on that side. So they knew, therefore, that Britain couldn't be a part of Europe in the last days. In 1806, this man wrote this, George Faber. The great maritime power, Britain, cannot be leagued in friendly alliance with the Confederacy, that Confederacy of Nations. John Thomas, in 1850, the fourth beast of Daniel's vision represents the sin power in its European constitution. The 10 toes belong to the image as a united dominion. Hence, Britain cannot be included among them. He's writing that in 1850. Britain cannot be part of Europe. And even, this is just remarkable to me, the faith of this brother. In 1983, when Britain had joined the European Union, wrote this: though we don't know how it will happen, Britain will separate from Europe. Amazing. Well, a final point that I'd like to make now regarding Israel again is this. Isaiah, Ezekiel, Zechariah, Revelation all speak of an earthquake happening at this time, at the time of this invasion. The warning signs are there. Only last week, a small earthquake happened in the south. And the Times of Israel reporter points out the fact that major earthquakes strike Israel once every 80 years or so. They're overdue, as it were, a major earthquake. The warning signs are there. The Lord Jesus Christ could return today. He could return any time and soon. So let's go back to our initial question. Well, first of all, let's just have a tiny recap. The moral state of the world in which we live reflects the prophecies of the last days that we read in 2 Timothy 3 and 2 Peter 3. The physical state of the world, and certainly this virus, explains the attitudes of people looking after those things which are coming on the world. We're seeing these things coming. We're looking at our phones, we're looking at our computer screens. We can see it coming, and it's putting people in fear. We see Israel are back in the land. Jerusalem is in Jewish hands, as the Lord Jesus Christ had prophesied. And no longer is it a wasteland. It said there in Ezekiel 38 and there in verse 8, that they would come back to this wasteland. But there in verse 36, chapter 36, it said that they would then make that land fruitful. We've seen that to be the case. We've seen a huge increase in the Jews on the West Bank. People are multiplying there. We see Russia, Gog, but who we're not just calling out to be Gog now. People for hundreds of years have said, that is Russia, working closely with Persia, with Iran. That's what we're seeing on our news screens, as it were. We're seeing them also allying themselves with Libya, with Sudan, with France. Israel, we see, has many Russian-speaking Jews and huge natural reserves, gas reserves. Could that be the spoil that makes them want to come down into the land? Russia has an army, an air force, and a navy directly above Israel, directly above. They're ready to be the king of the north coming down. And we see that Britain has now left Europe. It couldn't be on the side of the king of the north. So truly we can say the Lord Jesus Christ could return today. He could be here. He could be here so soon. So now let's get back to that initial question. If Jesus was to return in 2020, how would that change you? That's the notes that we need to take. We've seen some of the clear signs suggesting that his return is close. Where do your loyalties lie? The Lord God wrote this: to this man will I look, even to him that is poor and of a contrite spirit, and trembleth at my word. Let's finish now with